Welcome to this edition of the B2B Engagement Podcast. I'm your host, Gavin Finn with Kaon Interactive. And today we're talking about scaling for hypergrowth by digital transformation. And we're extremely honored and privileged to have with us a true industry luminary and veteran, Francis Chow, who is the Vice President and General Manager of the In-Vehicle Operating System and Edge at Red Hat. Welcome, Francis.
Gavin, thank you very much for having me.
It's such a great pleasure to have you with us today. And what we're very interested in is the accumulation of a variety of your learnings and lessons in what it takes to deliver digital transformation at scale. Francis, why don't we get started a little bit by having us learn a little bit about your career and how you came to understanding how enterprises and large organizations scale the technologies that very often we're building in these individual silos.
Yeah, talking about my background, I'm a continuous learner. So as my career progresses, I'm trying to pick up new ideas and new things as I grow. And I started as an engineer designing semiconductor devices. And then I was interested to learn more about the business. So I moved from a technical role to a marketing role. And then I went to a sales role just to get a sense of what that means. That went through actually a tremendous period of learning for myself personally. And I did a little bit of corp dev, understand more about finance and legal. And eventually in the semiconductor world, I was running a $1 billion telecom business at Altera, which subsequently was acquired by Intel. After that, I figured that I love to learn more about software. So I actually left the hardware world, came to the software world about 8 years ago. I spent 5 years at VMware, helping them build to $1 billion business. Part of that was a hyperscale growth for the storage business from about 100 million to $1 billion in 3 years. So that was an interesting experience for myself personally. And then I was in telco and edge cloud at VMware before I joined Red Hat about 3 years ago. I started by being tasked to grow the automotive business. It's a startup for Red Hat. We see a lot of interest and demand for Linux that will be certified for safety in the market. So we started this effort about 3 years ago. And then about 2 years ago, I also picked up the rest of the responsibility for the edge portfolio so that we have alignment to cover all the edge spectrum for different industries.
That's obviously very valuable background for somebody who's a leader in an organization like Red Hat that you are today. And I think what's really fascinating is you've seen the industry from so many different perspectives, from engineering, sales, marketing, and consulting, and from building these infrastructures. One of the things that we've talked about on this podcast, but we also see in the industry a lot, is there's a lot of different definitions of digital transformation. What does it really mean? And when it comes to your current business, the in-vehicle and edge, what do you see as some of the key frameworks for what people mean when they talk about digital transformation?
I think the interesting thing is everyone kind of means something different when they talk about the digital transformation. But I think the end goal is actually quite similar, which is they see the need to be able to digitize their business. They need the need to leverage more data real time, and they see a need to make faster and better decisions to help drive the business growth. And if you look at a lot of industries, I think it depends on where they are in the process of transformation, where some of them have not had the opportunity to need to move fast because of industry dynamics. But I think the interesting thing is everyone have witnessed how IT has transformed in the past 20 years. And a lot of these principles that have solved challenging problems in the IT world, now people are seeing that maybe we can bring these principles to the OT world to help transform multiple industries in parallel.
I think it's a very interesting point, because I think when people think about digital transformation, very often they're focused on the word digital. And of course, it's driven, as you said, in many cases by data being available. So you can't really deal with analog information or analog assets anymore. You're dealing with, at a minimum, hybrid. But the key word in that phrase is really transformation. The digital is really a facilitator. The transformation is really what I think, as you've experienced in your industries that you've worked with, is it's the change that needs to occur from the old way of doing things, partially because it was analog or partially because it was framed before a lot of these technologies became available. But as you said, there's a need to change. And so I think that the primary motivation here is to look at sort of what is the next phase supposed to look like, and how can these digital infrastructures facilitate that for them, right?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is every industry had been designing the systems, software, hardware systems, in a very purpose-built manner. Hey, I need to solve this problem, so I'm going to build a solution for this problem, right? Is typically very bespoke, right? But I think what happened over a long period of time of these systems is sort of built for purpose with very tightly integrated hardware and software. Now, as these systems become more complex, it is getting very difficult to maintain, update, and operate, and also integrate the systems. Now, if you witness what happened in the IT world, right, the transformation that happened was from these purpose-built IT systems to more of a platform approach, that you have multiple applications, in many cases containerized in such a way that it's movable from one platform to the other, and you can have many things running on the same horizontal platform. I think this is the type of transformation, right, that we can bring from the IT world to the OT world, helping see the manufacturing automotive in such a way that we can drive innovation faster and be able to lower costs and then do more reuse and make maintenance and operations a lot easier in the future.
I think that's such a critical point when you think about the evolution of how people, they start with this notion of digitizing, and they sort of digitize the analog process. But what you end up with is a series of point solutions, and that's not scalable, right? And then that becomes difficult to maintain, difficult to upgrade, and very resistant to change because, as you said, they're bespoke, they're built particularly for that problem. So this lesson about thinking about digital transformation as a platform-driven journey, I think, is really important across industries and across different functions within companies. It's not just IT. You take sales and marketing, for example. A lot of companies have focused on digitizing their assets, as an example, and then creating point solutions around different kinds of their sales and marketing infrastructure. But you end up with this very disparate group of non-scalable, highly bespoke, and non-reusable infrastructure components that then don't achieve the true potential of what digital transformations promises, right?
Absolutely.
And how do you see this sort of influence affecting, let's take, for example, the in-vehicle solutions that you brought to bear? Where was the industry before, and where is the vision for automotive going?
Yeah, I think if you look at how vehicles has been designed in the past 50 years, you have these purpose-built systems, as I said, right? You have a control system for your door. You have a control system for your windows. You have a control system for your powertrains, audio, video, right? And we end up having, in a modern vehicle, probably about 100 to 150 of these embedded control units. And as you can imagine, right, it's getting to a point that it's no longer feasible to scale and manage, especially when the end customers are demanding more on features and safety, right? They want autonomous vehicle, they want more personalized infotainment systems in the car, they want more personalized driving experience. And these things demand more software complexity in such a way that the traditional way of design is no longer sustainable. And so I think what's happening in the industry now, everyone is looking at ways of building more scalable platforms. That requires a change not just on hardware, but also on software that sits on top. And it's not just the product they deal with, but also processes, right? How they design things in a cloud native way. What does it mean for that, for the industry? And also culture, right? What is the right org structure to drive innovation, right? How do we incentivize people to open for change? These are all very interesting problems I think the industry is facing today.
Yeah, and I don't think it's specific to that industry either. When you think
No.
about the transformation across the landscape of change, those are very common problems. And so to just recap what you said, the industry was designed around solving very specific problems in contained ways. And there was not a lot of integration going on. So one change is, in order to really adapt fast, to be able to change fast, you really need systems that are not quite so self-contained and siloed. They need to be built on reusable modules and integrated components and those kinds of things. And then the second part is you've got to design your organization to do those things, because our previous organizations were designed to build those very specific siloed solutions, right? And as in general, organizations think about scale, and in some cases hyperscale or hyper growth, what we really have to think about is the scale limiting factors very often are the organizations themselves, not the technology.
Yes. We see that across the board, right? It's just sometimes actually by looking at the portfolio of a company's product, you can tell how they organize, and they may not be optimized for scale.
Right. And so how do you, when you're working with your clients, you're working with large organizations and infrastructures, and you're building a technology strategy and an architecture roadmap, how do you address those more human related issues, the organizations, the individual motivations, the training? How does that get integrated into this transformation journey that you're going on?
I think obviously it's really up to our clients to make the decisions about their organization and culture. What we can do is to help influence and guide them. Hey, if this is the end game of how we're gonna design things, right? What is the optimal way of making it happen? Obviously, we've heard a lot of stories about internal politics and incentives, right? How do we overcome these challenges? I think is a big piece of the equation. And again, what I think our role is to collaborate with our customers and partners and what's the best way to accomplish that end goal. And again, it's never just about the product, but we have to think about processes, the how, and then the who's, right? Where do we find the talent, right? What are the ways to architect the system in such a way that you can find the right talents, for example? Those are the kind of questions we have to deal with.
I think those are very common scenarios and questions across different functions within any company, within any organization, because they're all going through the same challenges. And one of the things that we've seen is that organizations are very often very eager to innovate in a highly localized way, right? So they'll innovate in one particular area, but it becomes very challenging to scale that innovation to the rest of the organization. And I think a lesson that you seem to be pointing to here is you really have to start with that scale as a goal before you architect any of these individual solutions, so that you're building that for that long-term vision. Can you speak a little bit to this sort of ratcheting effect? Technology develops and then you realize, oh, we can use it for these kinds of applications. So applications get built. Sometimes you have a need, a market need that then creates demand for the technology, and how this has sort of evolved with respect to networks and edge and the IoT landscape.
I think what we've seen is a lot of industry have the same underlying challenges that we can leverage a lot of the industry have solved for IT and bring those principles to those markets, such as manufacturing, retail, automotive. They all have a very similar challenge profile, although they manifest in their own language and own ways. But the fundamental ways is how do we enable innovation faster, right? How do we provide platform technologies that doesn't have a traditional vendor lock-in, right? How do we promote collaboration and enable the ecosystem to work together? And our belief is being an open source company, right? Open source is a good way to achieve these goals. Not only open source platforms have been proven in the IT world in the past 10, 15 years, but a lot of collaborative model that open source provide is also a good way to bring together the ecosystem, because everything is in the open. Everyone sees what everyone else is doing. We can work together without having to wait to sign an agreement or negotiate a contract or license IP or even do a joint venture. And I think the speed that we can bring to the market with open collaboration is a great way to achieve this type of transformation across multiple industries.
There's so many, lessons learned there. And I think just to synthesize some of what you said, first of all, we've talked about platform requirement is really important. The second point you brought in there was collaboration, which I think is both a factor during the process of building and crafting these solutions, but also after they're developed, is the collaborative use cases, so that their deployment is seen in a collaborative environment. And then the other thing that you mentioned, which I don't think a lot of companies have been able to achieve, is this promise of being able to create and scale in a more rapid fashion, because we're not building these humongous big systems over a 5-year period and then deploying it. It's a black box development process. We're doing incremental development over periods of time, right? And I think so. If you think about those as principles, you have a market challenge or a business need. You've got to think about those core principles as the way you're going to deploy. In the past, you would go out and do a custom development for that business need. You'd build whatever it took to make that happen. You go and deploy it. But today we have these other requirements, including scale and also the rapid pace of change. And so what we've really got to think about is starting with a platform level approach, thinking about collaboration during the process as well as after the process, and then also understanding the process of incremental development and deployment as opposed to full scale sort of. I'm not saying waterfall is necessarily the wrong approach, but certainly the old approach of all the requirements in, lock them in, build it, wait for the build to finish, and then deploy. We have lots of, through this digital transformation, opportunity to really build a more scalable process, not just a scalable infrastructure, right?
Well, and actually, Gavin, I think you brought up an interesting point is the traditional design process, let's say waterfall, right? There was a time that you can understand all the requirements and quite stable over the period of the design. And I think now we're living in a digital world where new technologies changes constantly, right? And in order for us to be able to capture those new technologies and take advantage of that, like AI most recently, I think it's more important even to be flexible. We no longer can afford to have everything sort of lined up before you start the project. You have to kind of figure things out as you go, and which again requires definitely tighter collaborations among ecosystem players.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the things that organizations also need to design themselves around that new process and approach. You know, it's a little bit of a different, not just logistically mechanism, but also the way that people are trained, the way that they're incentivized, the way that the organizations work together. That's again a cultural aspect of this, right?
Yep.
One of the things you touched on was sort of the pace of innovation and how fast things are coming in. You mentioned AI. What are some of the use cases for AI that you're seeing in the process of building some of these applications? Have you seen anything actually come to fruition yet in terms of deployed solutions, or are there still experiments going on? Where are we, or where are you with respect to AI?
Well, I think AI has been around for a long time, especially predictive AI. And now we're talking about generative AI, which is a new paradigm and definitely adds more capabilities to what we can do at the edge. And if you look at kind of what has been happening, right? Advanced driver assistance systems or autonomous vehicle, right? I think what we have witnessed in ChatGPT as an example definitely brings a lot of new capabilities on customer support and services in multiple industries. And I think that type of predictive intelligence also can help with design, right? We have seen different companies coming up with different products, including, from Red Hat and IBM, like code assistance, for example, right? How do we help our developers design code faster? How do we help non-experts being able to use tools, to get to, a certain point? And how do we also add intelligence on optimizing systems? Right.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, because obviously when we see this public interest in AI, what we're really talking about is a generalizable use case that people can relate to. How do you see these new technologies affecting the end user customer experience? And I think, I'd like to get started and give you sort of the thread that I've been thinking about a lot, which is the customer experience has been sort of not necessarily an afterthought, but one of the elements of design that everybody's had to take into account, customer experience. What we're finding now is that there's a customer centricity to almost everything we're doing, which is putting that customer experience at the very core of the decision-making frameworks that we make. And that's true when we're talking about an end user of a vehicle, for example, or an end user customer for us if they're buying something from us. And what we're seeing is that even in these digital transformations in sales and marketing, the customer is driving the process. It's their decision making. It's their way of thinking. It's the way they want to navigate rather than the way you tell them to navigate. The requirement to completely rethink the way that you deliver solutions, focusing on that customer experience rather than just features that you deliver and expect the customers to either learn how to use or to follow your process. Right? And when we think about the AI capabilities in terms of customer experience, I think of personalization. How do you see customer experience being affected by these, let's say, more generally available AI capabilities?
I think it's probably going to be a phase that customers have to kind of go through. I think we are sort of in the early stage of kind of moving from a personal interaction to more of a machine-driven interaction. Some might not like it because you cannot talk to a person anymore for any customer support. On the other hand, a lot of retail chains and stores have been experimenting, different ways of self-check, right? And then that incorporates a lot of computer vision, right, which is also AI driven. You have to look at traffic flow in the store to try to optimize placement for the best customer experience. It's a question of how do we implement in such a way that it gives a better consumer experience. Like as an example, while you're in the store, right? Maybe you have to get an alert from your phone, you get a coupon from your phone, or when you check out, right? So I think different companies experimenting these different ideas. The point is, I completely agree with you, right? That end customer experience is the most important, and having the agile and platform approach is the fundamental requirements for the companies to kind of get there.
Yeah. You mentioned there is that there's still an experimental phase of going through how do we deliver superior customer experiences. And I think one of the things that we're seeing already is that it's not just about personalization, but it's about dynamicism and flexibility in that customer experience. One of the reasons that people do like to talk to a customer service rep sometimes when they call up is because they may ask a question that they hadn't thought of before the call started. And so it's not a sequence of predetermined clicks that you're going through.
Right.
So one of the things that we think about here is creating customer experiences that respond rather than dictate, right? So they respond to the user rather than constrain the user. And that's one of the reasons I think conversational interfaces are becoming so interesting for a lot of these people, is because you can, in our conversation here today, we don't have a script. We're talking to each other and we're learning from each other, and that's leading to other questions and answers. And I think that's part of what the promise of these kinds of capabilities is to create a human machine interaction that delivers a very similar kind of experience. We have a question from one of the live attendees here today asking what we see as some of the behavioral transformation barriers for sellers and customers as we deliver these customer experiences driven by AI. So I'll put it to you first.
I think it's a matter of getting used to the new ways of interaction with technology. Just again, using ChatGPT as an example, right? How you prompt that application gives you very different results. And just like any new technology, it gets some time to get used to. And I do think collaboration, continuous learning, this is how we can adopt new technologies faster.
I think that's exactly right. It's this notion of collaboration. I think there's two key behavioral transformations that have to happen. One is a collaborative mindset internal to the organization as we're building things, as we're discussing, much more collaboration, often driven by technology facilitators, but then also collaborating with our customers, right? Collaborating with the market. So that's part of it. The other thing that I think we are seeing, which I'm not sure it's a barrier yet, but it could be as we start to think about this, is when we deliver these experiences to customers, we lose control. So let's say we'll just take even like a sales presentation. If somebody is delivering a sales presentation to you, they're in control. They're marching through the PowerPoints, or they're telling you their story. They're actually driving. When you flip that around and let the customers interact, there's a loss of control of what's happening. Right? And from a behavioral point of view, we're actually seeing in a lot of enterprises, the sales and marketing teams being very concerned about, well, what's going to happen if the customer asks this, or if we don't know, we're not telling them at that point. And I think this is part of that mindset that you talked about earlier with respect to organizations. We need a transformational mindset, which both is experimental in nature and at the same time is also innovative. If we're going to deliver on this promise, we have to change. We have to find ways, in this case, to let the customers be in control. And in
the end, I think this is what everyone is looking for. Maybe it's just a hidden need because that technology was never available in the past. And in the end, I think everyone's trying to deliver good value to customers. This is how you build businesses. And so I think this is just a great way to push everyone's quality higher to be able to meet the maybe unspoken needs in the past. I think the key thing is have a flexible mindset, right? I think in the end, it all boils down to employees and associates, right, in the company on how they think about change. Because in the end, it's about human to human interactions, right? And even internally, we should also look at driving value for employee, for growth, as an example, right? The traditional way of design may be more purpose-built systems, and the traditional career ladder maybe rise up the rank. And I think maybe it's also the time to flip it, to think about, okay, if you think about platforms for designs, maybe let's think about skills and values instead of titles and ranks. And I think having that mindset to be able to adapt and learn things and believe, right, that serve the best purpose should be a new mode of thinking of hiring and growing employees.
I really like the way you frame that, because I do think we have the opportunity, because of this change in the mindset, to really get a relatable model for those people, even the ones who are maybe stuck in the more traditional ways and have a harder time. Because as consumers, we see the transformational effect in our own lives, right?
Totally agree.
That I think is a relatively recent phenomenon.
Yes, I think, yeah, I know traditionally people have been separating the B2B and the B2C world, right? But to me personally, it's still, in the end, right, humans selling to humans, even in the B2B context, is still how you interact with systems who are designed by humans, right? So that collaboration, that connection, it is still very important.
Yeah. What I wanted to just close with was how you see the confluence. I know you've got sort of two different hats at your current role with Edge and IoT and with the automotive, but how you see internal company organizational infrastructures coming together across different functions, because you deal with a lot of organizations that have different functional areas. How do you see companies adapting to this so that the teams learn how to implement and collaborate better?
I think for companies to try to adapt more IT-based principles to, let's say, the OT world, there's probably a need to harmonize the traditional silos between like IT and OT, and also have more kind of matrix in such a way that ideas can be shared, that the best idea can win. And it's going to be very important for companies to figure out a way to leverage these new technologies and ideas for their own hypergrowth trajectories.
So I think that's great advice for companies, is to think about it two ways. One is the technical infrastructure, harmonizing those, but also breaking down those barriers so that you have matrix organizations, cross-functional teams solving more holistic system-wide problems rather than these individual, very localized problems. So
I truly believe, right, those who are closest to the problem should be making decisions on how to solve the problem because they have the full context.
That's a very interesting framework. It is something that we've observed, is the more we get cross-functional teams together, the harder it is for them to come to a decision. The process of making a decision is actually becoming harder. And so that's something we should be thinking about. I like your philosophy of letting the ones closest to the problem have the most influence of that. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great way to close, to impart this wisdom to our audience. It's been such a great pleasure to be talking to you, Francis. I'm so grateful. Look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Thank you, Gavin. It's been such a great discussion. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about these interesting topics.